We're welcoming Dr. Joshua Bogunjoko, who is the International Director of SIM International and is leading their organization's strategic research effort in the selection of fields of ministry, but in conjunction with the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Seminary. It's a privilege to have him share specifically on these research dossiers, which go beyond the mere people group profiles. He's joined by Brad Kuhn from the research desk of Frontier Fellowship, who assists in the informational design of the work there at the Center for Global Christianity. Gentlemen, thank you for sharing your research.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Today we want to share with you some of the work we have done, and I think this take off really neatly from what Len shared in the previous session in this room. As a mission, SIM has been committed to unreached people groups and locations around the world for many, many years since our foundation. But we have realized in recent time that we needed to do more than just our traditional thinking in this regard. A couple of years ago, specifically in 2015, we did a review of our purpose and mission statement. Our old mission statement talked about SIM's focus on evangelizing the unreached, ministering to human needs, and discipling believers into churches. But we realized that although we made this commitment, we were actually not living it out because the language of unreached people was quite nebulous to us. Where do you start? Where do you engage? So when we did a review of our purpose statement between 2014, 2015, 2016, we chose to move away from the language of unreached people and talk about communities where Christ is least known or communities where Christ is not known at all. And sometimes communities where Christ was once known but not known anymore, because we realized that the world is quite complex. And as we learned from the previous presenter, that complexity plays into how we engage with the world to which God has called us. And so when we rewrote our purpose statement, we said, convinced that no one should live and die without hearing God's good news. We believe that He has called us to make disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ in communities where He is least known. But the first statement in our mission statement is that we cross barriers to make disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ in communities where He is least known. We know that there are barriers to the gospel in many places today, and those barriers vary from community to community. For some, it's the geographical barrier. They are located in places that are geographically difficult. In other communities, it is religious religious barrier, because you have to cross religious challenges before you can get the gospel to them. For some, it's political barrier. For some, it's linguistic. They are just diverse barriers. But we realize that by thinking, the thought that we want to reach the unreached peoples does not give us sufficient foundation for thinking about these barriers to reaching these people. Because people groups, although it's useful and we use it, it does not help us to think about specific locations and what are the barriers to reaching people in their community, in their location, because we believe that every people group live in a community. They don't just exist as a people group. They have communities, they interact with others, and most of the time, they actually live with other people from other ethnicities as well. So that revision to our purpose statement, focusing SIM on communities where Christ is least known, led us to ask the next question, which was, is SIM actually engaging with those communities? because now we could measure something. We could ask ourselves hard questions. We could ask ourselves, where are those communities where Christ is least known? And where are our workers going? We could do an internal statistics and ask ourselves, if the largest unreached people groups are in Asia, for example, are SIM workers going to Asia, or are they going to other places? And we came to the conclusion that although we had said for years that we're committed to unreached people groups, the majority of our workers are still going to places where the gospel is already present and the church is quite strong. And so we ask ourselves, how can we reverse that situation? How can we focus our resources and our people on communities where Christ is least known? And it is that question of how do we make a change, an intentional organizational change that allow us to focus on communities where Christ is least known. It is that question that led to what we are now calling faithful witness in forgotten communities. The language of faithful witness actually comes from the book of Revelation, where Jesus talked about my faithful witness. And we felt like that is exactly what God is calling us to be in these communities, realizing that there are all kinds of barriers to getting into these communities and working with these communities. I hope I'm coming through clear, because I'm seeing a signal that my audio may be having a problem. Can you hear me clearly?
It's better now. It was bad.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It's good now. Go ahead.
Okay, good. So in asking the question, what are the barriers to these communities? We realized that there was one barrier that we can address as an organization. And it is the barrier of people not actually going to these communities. And so we looked at ourselves and asked ourselves, why is that? And one of the key reasons is that people don't want to go to these locations by themselves. They want to go as a team. And SIM does not have a tradition of putting a team together to go to a location. We recruit people as individuals and as families, and we place them in ministry here and there. So we came up with the idea of Faithful Witness Initiative in communities where Christ is least known. And the focus of that is specifically in this kind of communities. The goal is to recruit 6 to 15 team members with diversity of skills, diversity of ethnicity, and diversity of, diversity of focus in terms of ministry strategy, to go to these communities and to live among these people, learn their language, learn their culture, and bring the good news of Jesus to them. But the emphasis is that they will be witnesses in these communities. We talk about forgotten communities, not that God has forgotten them, but that the church has forgotten these communities. We realize that as the church of God, we need to be more intentional in focusing on these communities. So with this commitment, there was a need for us to be intentional with mobilization, intentional with the recruitment of workers, and intentional with the location where these workers are going. That is where the relationship with the TGCSC comes in. Because as we were looking at these locations, especially one in Chad, initial 3 were Chad, Ayutthaya in Thailand, and then the Kai region of Mali. We were asking ourselves, how do you get into those communities? What information do we need about those communities? Not only to be able to place workers in those communities, but to also come up with effective mobilization strategy for those communities, as well as effective ministry strategy. Those questions led us to the relationship with the TGSC, where we are asking ourselves the need for research to address local context of these communities, to address the existing work among them. Are there other organizations that are working with these people that we can partner with to address the barriers that exist to the gospel in those communities, to address the possible strategy for ministry in those communities, and then to look at other details that are pertinent to a successful placement of a group of 6 to 15 workers in those communities. And then we felt like by doing this with an organization that actually has a reputation for doing good research, we benefit, and we are able to also then take that research and take it to the next level, because this is a commitment for us as an organization. We want to take those research and then use it in other places as we continue to look at communities where Christ is least known and recruiting teams to place in those communities. Currently, we have 7 of those dossiers that has been finished. We have about 6 teams now that are being put together or that we're working on. Some of them are already in those locations, already making use of what we have learned. But we have many more that we're just bringing together. Of course, COVID has slowed things down significantly for us, but the process and the work continues. And Brad is going to take you into those research and what we have found as we have worked together. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody see my PowerPoint presentation there?
Good.
Great. First, I'd like to express appreciation to Brad Gill and the EMS convening committees on behalf of the Center for the Study of Global Christianity and Frontier Fellowship for your invitation to share this project today. Special thanks to Dr. Bogunjoko and Michelle Cruson and the SIM Faithful Witness teams for their wonderful collaboration on this project over the past year. And I want to recognize and thank the authors of the dossiers, the Center for the Study of Global Christianity co-directors, Dr. Gina Zerlo and Dr. Todd Johnson, as well as research associates David Hannon, Renzo Meza, and Michael Hahn. I've had the privilege to work alongside the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, or CSGC as I'll refer to it, in a part-time or volunteer capacity since 2006. And I'm grateful to have had a chance to continue my participation with them on this project through the generosity of my mobilizing agency, Frontier Fellowship. The monumental 3rd edition of the World Christian Encyclopedia was published at the end of 2019 after years of work by Dr. Zerlo, Dr. Johnson, and hundreds of friends worldwide. And that work is reflected in the quality of the data in these dossiers that we'll be looking at today. The creation of these research dossiers began in July 2019 as part of a collaboration between CSGC and SIM's Faithful Witness in Forgotten Communities initiative. And our goal was to create high quality research dossiers that would help SIM make thoughtful decisions regarding the use of resources and personnel in 7 forgotten communities around the world. And through the creation of these dossiers, we also sought to experiment collaboratively with a new approach to the people group profile that's often used in field placement strategy and mobilization. And by addressing SIM's broader focus on placing teams in forgotten communities, these dossiers naturally presented an opportunity to place ethno-linguistic identity within the framework of a wider community identity in their regional and social contexts. Dr. Johnson, the CSGC co-director and co-author of the World Christian Database, comments that the concept of people groups has always been complex and multifaceted, but it's still critically important because the anchor is language. Despite rapid global changes, unreached people still speak languages and live in communities that have little or no access to the good news of Jesus. The point of a new approach in these profiles then is not to abandon the people group paradigm in research, but to augment it with community focus, which addresses wider cultural context and community-based engagement strategies as integral aspects of a faithful, effective, and holistic witness among forgotten communities. We faced immediate practical questions when seeking to produce research beyond the familiar people group paradigm. What exactly are the realistic boundaries for the scope of such research? How do you define communities in order to produce concise, meaningful, qualitative research? How do these definitions of community relate to existing quantitative measures which allow for regional or global comparison? Defining the 7 communities to be researched was not a uniform process, and in some cases, several conversations took place between SIM leadership, field teams, and CSGC researchers to determine the scope of the region or community that was to be researched. The resulting combination of ethnic, linguistic, geopolitical, and metropolitan boundaries reflect the real-life complexity facing field teams defining the focus of their ministry efforts in multi-layered dynamic communities. For example, research on the Maba people of Chad focused on their presence in the Wadai region, and SIM was primarily interested in the community life outside of the capital of Abeche. Practical realities pushed us to develop our community research around these internationally recognized provincial and metropolitan boundaries in addition to ethno-linguistic identity, for the sake of information gathering and comparative statistics. Len Bartlotti and Dave Dedema recently wrote in EMQ that the rise of hybrid identities as a foil to the discrete people group model shows that human complexity remains beyond our grasp to fully comprehend. The people group paradigm humbles all advocates. Through the process of working through the definitions of each community in these dossiers, it was time-consuming and messier than simply using a defined people group list. There was great value added by listening to various perspectives in preliminary dialogue. Global and local voices from the academy in the field were captured through agency and researcher lenses, and they contributed to a research product that offers a wide contextual understanding and perhaps additional facets of the human complexity that Dedema and Bartlotti reference. CSGC has published 6 of these dossiers so far, including communities such as Kays and the Hassaniya speakers of Mali, Chittagong, Bangladesh, and the Muslim Bengali people, and Ayutthaya, Thailand. And these can be found at globalchristianity.org. An additional 4 dossiers are close to publication, including 3 in partnership with Frontier Fellowship, and we'll focus on communities and regions in India, Indonesia, and Afghanistan. CSGC researchers identified 30 questions in 13 topical categories to guide our initial research of these particular communities, and they included questions about history, geography, economic development, politics, conflict, cities, environmental challenges, gender, ethnicities, language, religion, churches, denominations, and mission. And research began with a review of scholarly publications, followed by informal interviews with regional experts. The information was gathered and prioritized in the dossiers based on completeness and relevance to the community scope. And then finally, the CSGC researchers interviewed SIM field teams to get feedback and address any significant research gaps. Though each dossier differs in scope, one of the contributions that CSGC and SIM wanted to make in this research was to combine existing data on Christianity and mission in the World Christian Database with socioeconomic, health, and gender data from the United Nations and other sources. And in doing so, we hope to bridge the figurative divide that often appears in the presentation of mission data between missions as evangelism and missions as social action. In each dossier, the current status of human development in these communities is intentionally included as a major part of the narrative, and critical community issues such as lack of religious freedom or access to water and healthcare are addressed specifically wherever possible. Every dossier also includes a prominent section on the role of women within these communities, and this reflects the critical importance of attention to the particular issues that face women around the world in our missiology today. And also this is also a significant ongoing global research topic for CSGC. SIM has found that having this kind of community information readily available is valuable in the process of developing ministry strategies in these forgotten communities. And I would commend the current issue of the IJFM that was released this morning as well, that addresses these concepts of integral mission. In her article, Andrea Waldorf reminds us that integration into the community in all aspects of life is clearly described in Luke 10, the account of Jesus sending out the 72. He instructs them to stay in the community, live with the people, become part of their life, their joys, their sorrows, their fears and pains, to know what makes them cry or laugh. In other words, he tells his disciples to become neighbors. Religion, Christianity, and mission analysis are also staple topics for each of these dossiers. each drawing on the wealth of research data available from the World Christian and World Religion databases to depict religious change over time, and where possible, religious freedom and interreligious interactions are specifically highlighted. A broad historical perspective on Christian presence and activity provides meaningful context for a brief analysis, which attempts to draw together salient pieces from the research into a broad level strategy recommendations for agency and field leaders. When we assessed the drafts of these dossiers with agency leadership and field teams, it became apparent that while they certainly will be helpful addition for strategic planning, one of the prominent uses will likely also be for the purpose of mobilization. One of the significant design elements of these dossiers are these feature pages, which provide visual data that situate the community in the context of its country and peoples, and also shows the current progress of Bible translation and access. The information dashboard approach to the country context data highlights specific demographic, social, and missional framework information. Tree maps visually depict the relative size of every people group in the country, as well as their Christian proportion. And a brief history and status of Bible translation and distribution is provided as a snapshot of this universally important factor of mission for these communities. In July of this year, the BBC released an article quoting Ivan Grattan with Charity Humanitarian OpenStreetMap, saying there are about 2 billion people in the world who don't appear on a proper map. It's shameful, he says, that we as cartographers of the world don't take enough interest to know who they are. People are living and dying without appearing in any database. They are only ever known to their neighbors. Coincidentally, CSGC records a similar number of people worldwide who still lack any access to the gospel. They also estimate that over 87% of all Buddhists, Muslims, and Hindus do not even have a Christian neighbor to be known by. The stakes are far higher for these communities than their symbolic appearance on a map or a database, though we should not underestimate the critical role that human development has on matters of religious freedom and gospel access. Ultimately, we hope, along with SIM, that these forgotten communities will be remembered by Christians around the world, and that Christ would be made known among the people and bring transformation deep into all parts of these communities. And to this end, the dossiers produced for SIM were also used as the basis to model dozens of similar communities around the world. And I would invite you to speak with Dr. Bogunjoko to learn a little bit more about their work in reaching these communities and how your agency might collaborate to bring a faithful witness to these forgotten communities as well. Thank you.
Just stop sharing your screen.
Thank you, gentlemen. That was excellent. And I don't see anything in the chat right away, at least in mine. It just seems you're talking about, I'll address both of you. There's kind of an intersection here. That's a kind of a hot word these days, but between kind of culture and the inclusive category of community that people identify because of culture, and then slicing across it are all these other factors that you guys are bringing in, which have to do with the human condition, the human environment, the community. And if you want to speak any more into that, that's fascinating because it's being embellished in your dossiers here. But just that intersection, how Dr. Bogunjoko, you brought up that you can see barriers better. Do you want to address that? That somehow this intersection allows you to see barriers.
Thank you. Yes. So let me take example of just the Fulani people in northern Nigeria. I mean, Nigeria is a very large Christian country, and the church is very large and very strong. But most of those strengths are in the south of the country. Now, if you go to the north of Nigeria, you see very large churches as well. The challenge is that most of those churches are people from the south and the middle belt, not the people from the core north. So the Fulani people, for example, are still a very large unreached people group in Nigeria. But then, how do we work with the church to reach the Fulanis of northern Nigeria? Now, many efforts have been made in the past. What are the question we wanted to ask was, what were the barriers to reaching these Fulani people? And we realized that one of the barriers to reaching them is the fact that although many of them, especially in the far north, are nomadic people, there are certain things they need that create relationship with them. But without a research that allow us to ask the question, what are those needs and where do the needs of these people meet what we bring? It's difficult to cross that barrier of just still never being able to reach the Fulanis, even though they live side by side with very large population of Christians in northern Nigeria. And so, for example, we realized in looking at these people that one of the key areas of outreach is medical. And so now we're working through, although for a long time we have not been establishing new medical outreach in SIM, we now realize that this is one community need for these Fulani people. And that is true for the Maba people of Chad as well. In the process of doing this research into the community, we realized the Mabas have one place where the whole community will gather. There's one place where they all go. And that is the only medical clinic in their community. So now we know that this is a place where we can begin to cross barriers to the Mabas, because there is something that brings all of them together, and it's their need for medical care, for example. So by going beyond just identifying the Mabas as unreached people or Fulanis as unreached people, getting into deeper analysis and deeper research within their community, we can begin to identify means of crossing barriers to them. Perhaps they don't want to hear the gospel, but they actually have something that creates immediate relationship with them, such as their medical need.
So we have this kind of researchers doing this awesome thing that Brad showed us that integrates all the social, economic needs and then the sense of people. But it seems to me that it took sandals on the ground, as we say, to kind of discover that it was this medical clinic where it was happening. So we're kind of interested in the intersection of major research, getting kind of a general sense of the issues, and then this perceptive, intuitive ability at the ground level to identify where things and these factors are really being lived and acted out. You want to expand on that anymore? That how much of your research is coming from on the ground? How much is coming from this major research kind of structure that you're bringing in? We can kind of see the interface. You want to comment on that anymore?
Do you want to comment on that? And I can.
Sure. I'll just say that there are about 3 or 4 questions there that kind of get at the same thing, which Len Bartlotti mentions there. His first question, are these living documents or starter docs to help us initiate the work? And I think these are starter documents. These are documents that can certainly grow, but they're one piece of a much larger picture. And we're doing the first steps in attempting to integrate in a way just like Len presented to us earlier. And I think that's the start of the research. But I don't think would say that this is everything. The other piece that I would add based on some of these questions is that the no access to the gospel is based on over 20 different factors that go into a people or a region and viewed on several different levels. So it is things like access to radio, television, internet that would have, and of course, the presence of Christians in the community as well.
If I can add to that, one of the key focus for us as an organization is disciple making. And we really believe that as much as you can use internet and radio, you do need boot on the ground to make disciples, because there's a life-on-life aspect of disciple making that is not going to happen just because you meet someone on the internet. There might be knowledge that can be passed, but living out the life of Christ requires that we have relationship. The relationship is key to that. And so, yes, there is an aspect of that, but actually all of these questions of access are asked in the process of doing this research. What kind of access do the people already have? Like I said, whatever access they have become part of the ministry strategy. And whatever access they don't have, the barriers that exist also become part of how you design your entry into those communities.
One of the questions is, what are the best aspects of doing this kind of demographic research? What kinds of information are you able to provide? General question there.
Go ahead, Brad.
Well, I'll answer for the Center for the Study of Global Christianity's research. It's primarily listed in the World Christian Database in terms of the quantitative data that we hold, which would be things like people group statistics that you saw on the world, UN data. There are hundreds of factors that you can pick from there. And one of the defining features for the World Christian Database, World Religion Database, is that you can actually view historical data as well. I think maybe I'll leave it to you, Dr. Bogunjoko, to talk about the local research, the local aspects that you can provide in research.
So, for example, for us, this research was very helpful to our team on the ground. So let me use the Ayutthaya region of Thailand, for example. I mean, there are many mission organizations in Thailand, and there are many of them basically who are engaged in ministry in Thailand. But Ayutthaya, which is in central Thailand, is one of those locations without effective gospel presence. Buddhists side by side with Muslims. And the kind of information we're able to get from this research helped our team in Thailand to be able to design what kind of ministry will be effective in starting among these people's group, especially in central Thailand. First of all, the first question they had to answer was, who are the kind of workers we need, the missionaries? What skill do they need to bring? It's not just, the fact that they need to learn the language, but what kind of skill will be needed in this community? We found out one of the key ministries that they could do is to youths. So we're recruiting people who will do sports with the youths. What kind of diversity do we need? We realized that we could bring in, Ethiopians, as we could bring in, Canadians. And so we are intentionally recruiting people from these diverse contexts because this is something that will be effective in engaging this community in central Thailand. And at the same time, we're also thinking, how long will it take for these people to be able to get integrated into this community? Recognizing the challenges, the history of that region, particularly being, an old, former capital of Thailand. And we realized, no, you have to commit long time. You cannot go into that region for a year. So we require that if you are committing to this team, you have to commit to at least 3 to 5 years to be in that location. So this are some of the ways we use the research data we are receiving to make both strategic ministry decisions as well as mobilization and recruitment decisions for these regions.
Thank you, gentlemen. You've given us something to think about. And we're groping for a new paradigm, and I think you've made some contributions. Thank you very much. We're going to call the session to an end now, and those who want to stay here will be starting up in another 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next session, for those of you who are aware, is the International Journal of Frontier Missiology lunchtime briefing. So this is your lunchtime, wherever you are.